Hey YouTube, Shelka04 here. Hey, first do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. It's important that I get as many people subscribing as possible. And please feel free to leave comments. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the use of deadly force. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to convey to you 9 separate stories that affected me that may or may not have been appropriate to use deadly force. And by that I mean pull out the weapon that I carry concealed. So here's the way I want to work this. I'll go through the 9 scenarios, and then I want you to pause the video for a minute. While I'm going through the 9 scenarios, though, however, feel free to just write down a couple of buzzwords so that maybe you can identify each one of the 9 for your own self. Then, like I said, pause the video and think for a minute what you would have done. And then I'll tell you to unpause the video when you're done, or when you're ready. And I'll tell you what I did. Alright? So let's start through the list. In the mid-80s, I went on a trip to Australia. And doing that necessitated that I get a visa stamp in my passport. So living in New Jersey, I got on the bus and went to New York City with my passport and proceeded to head towards the Australian consulate. About halfway there, on 42nd Street, broad daylight, middle of the day, I guess I pulled my passport out to look at it or something. I can't remember what the scenario exactly was, but I remember there's my passport, put it back in my pocket. Next thing I know, there's a guy standing in front of me with a big knife to my neck, and he says, I don't know what that book is, but it looks pretty important. He takes it from me and says, if you want this back, you're going to give me all the money in your wallet. So what did I do next? That's the first scenario. Second scenario is, again, in the mid-80s, my older brother and I were going down to the Florida Everglades to do a little rafting around. And right after we landed at the airport, we went to the Avis car rental place to check out a car and arrived there about 5 seconds after there was a shootout. So there's confusion, there's a smell of gunpowder in the air, there's 1 or 2 people who are injured, bleeding all over the joint. And so, the question is, what do you do then? Do you pull out your weapon to secure the scene? What would you do? What would be the appropriate thing? We'll discuss what I did next later. So the third thing is, while we're in the Everglades on our rafts, at about midnight, not too far from us, maybe, 200 feet away, a boat with its lights out comes slowly auguring into the lagoon area, and a seaplane with its lights out land, and they're transferring something from the plane to the boat. Obviously, this being the mid-80s, this is probably a cocaine drop. Not going on too far from us. So, again, what do you do in that situation, or what did we do? The fourth one, as a graduate student in Westchester, Pennsylvania, one summer I was sitting there watching TV in my apartment, and we lived sort of in a sketchy area. It was the county seat. It was a nice area during the week, during the day, but on the weekends and after hours, it got a little tough and a little sketchy. So, at this time, I hear some girl screaming bloody murder, screaming that she's being raped and needs help, and, horrendous screaming. So, do you grab your gun and go running, or what did I do? Again, we'll come back to that one. Now, up until recently, I may have mentioned in other videos that Andrea and I owned a mobile home park in southern New Mexico. There was an instance once when we had 8 empty mobile homes. There was an instance one time when we walked into a mobile home that looked like the door had blown ajar. And that was typical because the locks on some of them were shot, and so we'd use cable or wire to close the doors and keep them shut, and basically try to keep them weathertight. There was an instance, however, when we walked in there and there was a homeless guy, camping out in one of the trailers. So how do you deal with that kind of confrontation? I'll tell you what we did later. Now, again, in the mobile home park, one night we received a phone call at about midnight from one of the tenants at the other end of the park, and that's 850 feet away, way down there, that there's some guy doing something weird down around the empty trailers. So we get in the truck, we haul ass down to the other end of the park. Now, what we discover pretty quickly is that this guy had been siphoning gas out of tenant vehicles down there. When he sees us coming, he throws the gas cans in the back of his car and gets in the car. Now, the problem is, as we pull up, Andrea jumps out and is going to go and confront him. Now, my logic is to sort of pin him in with my car and not allow him to escape. But what happened was, him seeing or realizing that that's what I'm trying to do, he then began to use his vehicle to try to run Andrea over. So we'll come back to what I did later. Before the mobile home park, when we lived in Vancouver, Washington, I had 3 rental properties. One day, and I was working on one of them, I was fixing it up. One day I went down to one of these houses that I was working on, and the door was wide open. And my first thought was, shit, I forgot to lock it. And I walked into the house and had that realization that suddenly something doesn't look right. And it was then that I realized that the house had been burglarized. So, what do you do now? We'll come back to what I did in a few minutes. Living in the Pacific Northwest, I used to like to go and recreate and camp and stuff in the desert. So, one time, the girl I was going out with at the time and myself were in Nevada, and I like to check out ghost towns and photographs, old stuff like that. So we went to this old abandoned tungsten mine. The tungsten mine was about 15 miles off the beaten path. It was way out there in the middle of nowhere. And there was only the road to get to the tungsten mine because the rest of the area was really sharp, aggressive volcanic rock that you couldn't drive over. So we get up to where the mine is, and it doesn't look right. It's kind of, I didn't get a good feeling about it. So we turn around with the intention of leaving, and as we're leaving, a biker gang that had been inhabiting maybe like the mine headquarters down there came out and were blocking the road. 20 to 30 individuals, all armed. Pistols, rifles, clubs. It was the scene in Apocalypse Now where they pull into the Kurtz compound initially, and all those warriors are standing there on the raft. On the rafts, it was a scenario sort of like that. So, what did we do? Or what would you have done? We'll come back to that in a minute. And then finally, when I was about 19 or 20, I was working as a mall security guard. And I was dressed basically like a cop. You know, you got the black pants with the stripe down the side and the white shirt and the stupid little badge. And I'm walking down the mall one day with my flashlight and my other crap on my utility belt. And I turn the corner, and about 15 feet away from me is a guy standing with a long raincoat on and a sawed-off shotgun sticking out of the raincoat. He's in the process of holding up the pharmacy. So, I'll tell you what I did in a minute as well. Okay, now this is the point where hopefully maybe you've taken down a couple of notes and figured out in your mind what you may or may not have done. And I'll tell you what I did. But this is the point where hit the pause button, write down some notes, and I welcome the thoughts and comments down below. So, you know, we can make this a dynamic discussion. But let's go back up to the top of the list. I'll do a quick review, and I'll tell you what I did. So the number one, remember I was in New York City getting the visa on my passport so I could go to Australia. The guy took my passport and held a knife to my neck and said, "This looks pretty important, I want your money." What I did basically was I gave him all my money. All my money in my wallet. Now, being a citizen of New Jersey and living 18 miles away from New York City and knowing what a cesspit that is, nobody ever carries all their money in one location. So what this guy got was probably $7 in my wallet because I had $40 in my left shoe and $20 in my right shoe and probably $20 in my back pocket. Always prepare to hand over some of the money, but have other money stashed somewhere else on your person. I gave my money, and the event was over. When my brother and I were in Miami, and we went to the Avis car rental place, and there had been that shooting there, it was my brother's inkling to render aid because he later went on to become a doctor. So it's in his mind to let's stop and try to render aid. It's sort of in my mind to secure the scene and make sure that nothing else is going to escalate. But the fact of the matter is, it's not our fight. So I conveyed to my brother, this has nothing to do with us. Let's get in the car and leave. And that's what we did. We walked out the door and left. Just as I guess the police cars were coming. In the Everglades, if you remember, we were camping out on our rafts, and at about midnight, the drug plane came in and was handing off the goods to the drug boat. Did we do anything? Did we pull out our guns and wait to be seen or to be heard? No, we did nothing. We didn't move. We didn't turn on lights. We just continued to hide. If we had been spotted, we probably would have gone deeper into the mangrove, but that wasn't the scenario. If you remember, I mentioned when I was in graduate school and I heard the girl crying rape and screaming bloody murder, and it was the middle of summer. What I did was I picked up the phone, I dialed 911, and I said, there's somebody screaming bloody murder and claiming to get raped in the back alley behind my house. You need to come now. Of course, it's the 911 operator's job or responsibility or whatever to keep me on the line for as long as possible. And I simply, in a more agitated state, said, you need to send somebody here now, and I'm going to render assistance any way I could. And what I wound up doing was picking up a heavy framing hammer and running out in the alley to try to figure out what was going on. This is probably a mistake. I shouldn't have done any of this. But when I got there, the scene had already de-escalated and resolved itself. So nothing happened. Now, in hindsight, as I said, I should have probably just called the police, closed the windows, and left it there. Because running around in the alley with a claw hammer, probably not the best thing to do, because when the police pull up, they can't differentiate from me from the perpetrator. So I put myself in a bad situation there. When we walked in, okay, so the next scenario, when we walked into the empty mobile home and found the homeless guy in there, it would have been nice to have had at least a concealed weapon on me. I didn't at the time. But this area had a history of meth, and so not knowing anything about the guy inside the trailer, and he was a big guy, it might have been nice to at least known that if the situation got out of hand, we could have quenched that pretty quickly. What happened was we talked to him calmly, though, asked him not to return, asked him, how he got in, asked him where he heard that this place was an easy flop house, if you will, and basically talked to him like a regular person. He, in turn, talked to us like a regular person and left. So the situation was de-escalated pretty quickly. Now, the next one is, remember I told you there was the guy who was siphoning gas at midnight, and we got the call and drove down there in the truck. And when we stopped, Andrea gets out of the car and is trying to confront him at the driver's side window. I'm trying to park him in against a tree or against a pole or against a fence or something, but he, realizing this, is now trying to use his car to hit Andrea. So what I'm doing then is I go from one mental state of trying to pin him in to now trying to defend Andrea. So I'm trying to put the truck now between this guy and Andrea. So I'm moving and backing up and, moving all around and this kind of stuff. But I can't communicate what I'm trying to do to Andrea. So every time I would move in a position to try to protect her, she would go around in front of the truck, and again try to get to the guy's driver's side door. And he would maneuver back up and get his car facing her, and just a big mess. If he had hit her, or if her head had gone below the line of probably the steering wheel, I might have used deadly force. And it's, the logic here, again, your weapon is only to protect you and your immediate loved ones. In my mind, getting crushed up against the fence indicates that, to me at least, that he's trying to use his vehicle to inflict deadly force on me or someone, my loved one. If Andrea's head had gone below the line of the steering wheel, then that tells me that, her head or skull or thorax, whatever, could have been crushed between his vehicle and my vehicle, or his vehicle and a fence, something like that. So the way this resolved was this guy saw his window of opportunity and went that way. And the funny thing is, that way implied going through a pretty steep or a pretty deep drainage trough, and did a lot of damage to the undercarriage of his vehicle, but eventually he left. Subsequent to that, Andrea doesn't jump out of the truck anymore and try to confront people in the middle of the night. Now, I told you I had in Vancouver, Washington, 3 rental properties, and I went there to one of my houses one day to go work on it. It was empty at the time, and the front door was open, and the house, when I got in there, had been burglarized. Now, what they're going to tell you is the first thing you should do is call the police. But the fact of the matter is, if you call the police all the time, and we as humans do stupid things, you leave your oven on, you leave the windows unlocked, or, you forget to turn off the TV, I don't know what it is, but we do stupid things. So the tendency is that you're going to feel stupid to call the police and say, I'm not sure if I locked the door, or if when I left, I just left it ajar. I can't remember what I did last night when I left. So the fact of the matter is, I may have left the house exactly like it is now. So your inclination is to first look and see what the hell's going on. And that's what I did. I walked through the house, and then I called the police and said, hey, I've been burglarized. Now, the mistake there was walking through the house. It was my property. If I had a weapon with me, I probably should have had the weapon at least in my hand, because I had no idea what I could have encountered in any one of the rooms. And again, there are going to be those who are going to say you should just call the police first, and I know in most respects or many respects that's the right thing to do, but the fact of the matter is you're not thinking that at the moment. You're thinking, I got to look and see what the hell is going on, what's been stolen, and oh my God, this is a problem. And then you sort of settle down. Now, the next one is, remember I told you I was camping in the Nevada desert, and we had gone about 15 miles off the trail to an old tungsten mine, and then went up there near the crushers and all that sort of stuff, and turned around with the intent of heading back because the place was basically not what we had expected. When we came back, there was a biker gang made up of 20 to 30 individuals, all heavily armed, blocking our trail, blocking our progress. What I did was I handed my girlfriend at the time my 12-gauge shotgun and had her pointing it at the door and said, if things get weird, just squeeze that once. And I had my .357 in my lap, I guess in my right hand, pointing at the left door. And then we put it in low drive and proceeded to just auger our way through the crowd. And much like in Apocalypse Now, in that scene where the Hmong warriors are parting as the boat is coming through the middle of them, that's sort of what they did. However, as they're doing that, standing there with their guns, they're scraping them along the paint on the vehicle. So you got, as we're moving at 2 miles an hour through the crowd, and I'm looking at the guy who's there, the closest guy to me, and he says, "Don't ever come back here again." And all I say is, "We won't." And that was it. They didn't follow us. We didn't stop after we got past them. Maybe we should have called the police, but I didn't want to get involved with it. But it was a weird, awkward situation, and I don't know how I would have handled that any differently. The final one is the shotgun in the mall story. Remember I told you I was a mall security guard, and I walked around the corner, and there was a guy holding up the pharmacy there. And realizing that I'm looking like a cop and making $7 an hour, what I chose to do was basically backpedal very quietly and turn around and go out to the parking lot and get in my car and go home. And it wasn't until I got home and told my parents what had happened that we then called the police and then called the mall management. And the funny thing was the mall management was like, well, yeah, you're fired. I'm not coming back. All right, there, I'm not coming back. So those are my 9 stories. Now, as I'm telling you this, I've got one more story to tell you. And this is a story that actually happened to my father. So it's sort of hearsay in third person because I wasn't there. But it's another scenario just as well. My dad used to be an airline pilot. We lived in New Jersey. And my dad flew out of Kennedy Airport in New York. Now, depending upon the traffic scenarios, sometimes my dad would have to get off the main road and take back streets in order to avoid, flooding or traffic or whatever the deal was. Sometimes taking those back streets put you through some really, really, really bad neighborhoods. In this one instance, my dad was cruising around, and I don't know whether it was the South Bronx or Harlem. I can ask him, but I guess that's sort of a moot point. And he pulled up to a light, and this guy walked up to the driver's side window, and my dad's there in his pilot uniform. And the guy says to him basically, and again it's hearsay, and this is 35 or 40 years ago, so the story's probably being embellished or mutated in some way. But the guy says to my dad, I don't know what the hell that uniform means, other than the fact that you've probably got money on you or something. So, and he's holding a gun to my dad's head. So, give me all your money. And so, what my dad wound up doing, I guess, was giving this guy all of his money and leaving. Now, 35 or 40 years ago, or whenever this happened, that was probably the right thing to do, and probably the right reaction. The guy didn't shoot my dad, and my dad didn't shoot the guy. Obviously, my dad gave the guy the money and drove off. What's changed, though, about that area in particular, unfortunately, is we see a lot of people now getting involved in carjackings or simple holdups or burglaries or robberies. They walk into a store and just hold up the cash register, and then because you've seen me or you can identify me, I shoot you anyway. And it's the I shoot you anyway problem that has sort of developed in the last 35 or 40 years. So if that had happened to my dad today, I would more likely than anything have expected that guy who robbed him to have shot my dad. In that case or scenario, it might have been appropriate for my dad to have shot the guy. I don't know. I wasn't there. I do know, though, that subsequent to that, I never travel alone in those areas, but never travel alone in a tough area. And, one thing I learned, I was in Newark, New Jersey once when I was a little kid. I don't know, I was 18, we were cruising around. It was midnight, and we had 3 white kids in a station wagon, and we got stopped by a cop. And the cop basically said, don't stop. And just roll through the stop signs, roll through the red lights, but don't stop. So, that's the way those neighborhoods have developed. So I welcome your comments. Like I said, I would hope that this would be a dynamic conversation and people could provide some input as to how they think they would have handled the situations or what they think the appropriate solution would have been. I think I did a pretty good job at how I handled everything. Obviously, I never had any need to draw my weapon, and everybody got out okay, but there's always that first time. And On my next video, I'll go over what events or what the mentality was that, why I actually went out and got myself a concealed carry permit. But like I said, that's another video. So again, please subscribe to my channel, and if you got more friends who like this kind of topic, let them know, and I appreciate their subscriptions too. Shelka04 out. Thanks.